So we got really, after such a strong foundation to the conference this morning, we're moving on and I'd like to invite our facilitator and Pacific leaders to the stage while I introduce them. We have as the topic this time, first we listen. So that's very important, I think. There's a, you know, picking up Marine Faruqi's lesson to us, I suppose, that we take a disposition of partnership and mutuality, incredibly important that we listen first. This year, we're purposefully opening the conference with powerful messages from leaders within the region, providing a platform that sets the tone of the conference and places the urgency of their concerns forefront in delegates' minds. How can we assure that enduring principles like leaving no one behind, inclusivity and gender equality can coexist and remain priorities in the changed landscape? How can we adapt and support others to adapt to the opportunities and challenges presented by the shifts in global political and economic landscapes? Our esteemed guests will be able to offer insights into these and other questions, holding true for us all. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce this session as the speakers come up onto the stage. I would invite you to come now. Moderating the session is Kathryn Growl. She is the host of Pacific Beat, the ABC Radio Australia's program. She spent many years living and working overseas in Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu and Germany. Please welcome Kathryn, who will introduce the panellists before they speak. Welcome, Kathryn. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honour to be here and to be invited to have such a fascinating conversation with these leaders from the Pacific, something that I have the privilege to do every day. So I'm very excited to be doing it on stage with an audience I can actually see. It gives me great pleasure to introduce firstly Ambassador Amena Yauvoli. He's the Director General of the Melanesian Spearhead Group based in Vanuatu, where he's been since 2016. Now he's from Fiji. He has held many senior positions within the Fiji government. He's spent time being the Deputy Representative in New York. He's been the Fiji Ambassador for Climate Change. He's also been the Interim Secretary General of the Pacific Islands Development Forum. I guess one thing I noticed was that he has certainly probably been affiliated with many of the Pacific organisations that have acronyms that are mouthfuls. Knowing this is something that I do every day on air. He has worked for the Pacific Community, SPC. He was a Senior Policy Advisor on Sustainable Development at SPREP, as well, the environmental group in the Pacific. He's done a lot for public policy for Fiji and the Pacific region in areas of finance, trade, climate change and sustainable development. I'm sure he has much more to share with us, so I welcome him to the stage.
Thank you, moderator. Invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Greetings to all of you, Bula Vinaka, as we say in Fiji. Let me take this opportunity at the outset to convey my sincere appreciation to Ms. Susan Pascoe and Mr. Mark Purcell for inviting me to participate in your national conference today. It's an honor and a privilege to be here to share some of my views to the issues and challenges to what I feel as priority needs for our Pacific Island countries, in particular the Melanesian Spearhead Group, the organization that I currently head at the moment. I really like your theme, which is Beyond Aid, Championing Sustainable Development Cooperation. When you unpack this theme, I don't know whether you understand what your theme is, if you really unpack and understand what the theme is all about. There's so much in this theme that you might like to know that that contains issues and measures that could leverage sustainable development for our small island states in the Pacific. I would just like to focus my attention as important issues for us is, first of all, the commitment by our global leaders, by all our leaders, to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, or no one left behind. As you know, goal number 1 is poverty. Goal number 17 is partnership. This is why your gathering here this morning is really, really important. In one way or another, in one form or another, you really encapsulate that important element of partnership that the Sustainable Development Goals do desire to leverage and move it forward for its attainment by 2030. I know it's a lot of mouthful of issues and words and commitments, but I'm trying, to see if we can unpack this in the next session so that we can be able to talk on a similar level. I'm coming from the overarching level to see where, at the global level, what are the real challenges that we face, and one of which is the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I would not wish to go into the forefront of the issues that they contain, because as I said, it has 17 goals, and most of you are aware of this. 1 is poverty, 2 is hunger, and it goes on and on until the 17. 13 is climate change, something that is very close to my heart. And you might have heard the former Prime Minister of NLS speaking this morning, somebody whom I know and worked with in New York many years ago, and a champion, a true champion of climate change, a true champion of the sustainable development of our region, a true champion of ensuring that people are the priority of any development goals. People remains the priority. The sustainable development of our people, to eradicate poverty, to eradicate hunger, is always his priority and my priority as well. So this morning, without really trying to unpack the Sustainable Development Goals, I think I will focus my attention on how we at Melanesian Spearhead Group, or the Melanesian region, look at the issues of challenges for us in the day and age that we are facing under the globalization, trade liberalization, the age of massive migration. Borders are completely removed. And in this comes all these challenges that our member states do face from time to time in dealing with ensuring that our members pursue their collective interests to achieve sustainable development in their various respective jurisdictions. So I thank you for your desire to continue to listen to this kind of conversation, because I feel our advocacy from the overarching level, from the strategic level, needs to go down to the lowest level so that we are able to be seen and to be heard, that the issues remains with a collective partnership. We need to build this platform of partnership. We cannot, no government can do it alone. We have to work together, civil societies, NGOs, academias, research institutions, universities. You are needed in this journey towards achieving sustainable development or attainment of sustainable development for our region in Oceania, our small island developing states in Oceania. For the Melanesian Spearhead Group, before I go back to climate change, for the Melanesian Spearhead Group, in 2015, our leaders found, the MSG leaders found that if you don't know what the Melanesian Spearhead Group is, if you look at the map of the Pacific, we have the Micronesian sub-region, which is the equator up. Then to the east is the Polynesian sub-region, of which Tuvalu is part of. I'm just trying to put some geographical focus, because I know some Australians live here, they've never been to the Pacific. This is a fact. I've been talking to some Australians, they don't know where the Pacific, they don't know much about the Pacific. They don't know much about the Pacific. And the Melanesian Spearhead Group, starting from Fiji, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea. That is the group that I'm talking about, that I'm representing today. Okay, in 2015, we have this strategic document that our leaders adopted. It's called the MSG 2038 Prosperity Plan 4. I'll go very quickly. The first pillar that identified is political stability. In our sub-region, we have to drive and strive towards political stability in every sense of the word. When you look at the sub-region, our sub-region is known as the Arc of Instability. that was coined by one former Australian politician many, many years ago. The arc of instability is Melanesia. When you talk about instabilities from crossing the floor of any other sorts, it's very, very evident in Melanesia. So the idea of the agreement of our leaders to endorse political stability is an important pillar to drive sustainable development forward is very key for us. The second is economic prosperity. How can we achieve economic prosperity when there is no political stability? So these two are two sides of the same coin. And if you take it to the global level, how can we achieve sustainable development goals without even having political stability in our sub-region? I'm talking about the sub-region, the Melanesian Spearhead group. The third is social equality and inclusivity. Equality and inclusivity. As I emphasized earlier, the importance of engaging with all sectors of society is key, is fundamental, is pivotal in moving towards achieving sustainable development and growth for our people. And the fourth one is sustainable development. Sustainable development is where is overarching goal of where the three, the pillars of society do come together, including civil societies, NGOs, working together with government of the day to enable any government, any particular country, government in our region achieve a sustainable development. Within the sustainable development goals, there's a sustainable development pillar. We have what you call climate action, converting climate ambition to climate action. In other words, the science is already telling us. I'm sure you've heard this from Ambassador Soponga. Sorry. I keep referring to Ambassador, even though he was former Prime Minister. Because when we last parted each other, he was Ambassador in New York. And then he went up the rank and became Prime Minister of Tuvalu. Sorry. Pardon me for my interchanging of the reference to him. The important thing is that the science is very clear. The 2018 IPCC report, 1.5 report, clearly stated that if we don't act now, global temperatures will continue to rise. And this is where Article 2 and 3 of the Paris Agreement really comes in, where parties have to commit themselves. And I know we are in a land that could be a strong party to support the achievement, the attainment of the Paris Agreement. The 2018 UNEP GAP report talks about that if we don't act now, if parties are not going to ratchet up, meaning to strengthen their nationally determined contributions, which contributes to the reductions of greenhouse gas emissions. Sorry for the technicalities. We can unpack this in the panel discussions. It's important that countries continue to ratchet up their nationally determined contributions so that the gap, the budget gap, the carbon budget gap that we are still lacking at the moment to be achieved. There is no other way to do it. As the late Tony de Broom always say, 1.5 to stay alive. 1.5 degrees to stay alive. That is the language that they coined in Paris in 2015. So that being said, what would be your role and what would be our role? The role of, okay, I'll stop there. Just a final thought is that we need to mobilize. We need to work together in order for Oceania, for our small island developing states, come together and achieve what they committed themselves, obligated themselves collectively. Nobody did it individually. We are all parties to this process. We are all parties to the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN. We are all parties to the Paris Agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Clearly you had much more that you wanted to say. Luckily, we do have 50 minutes after each of the speakers have their moments up here to unpack just probably a little bit of some of these, because they are also, I should say, being invited to just share with us the main points that they want to put forward. They've not been instructed to kind of stick to any certain points, so we are expecting to have quite an array of discussions and points to be pulling apart. I now have the privilege to invite Siale Ilolahia to the stage. She is the newly appointed, or been in the position a few months now, Executive Director of PIANGO. Now, that is the Pacific Islands Association of Non-Government Organisation. As many of you will know, they build capacity of the civil society groups working in the Pacific and have been doing so for around a quarter of a century. Before that, she was working in promoting sustainable growth and development in the Pacific region. She was the Executive Director of the Civil Society Forum in Tonga, and she's brought together and supported coalitions working on issues as diverse as ethical leadership, women's access to finance, women's leadership and political participation, and also deep sea mining. Welcome you to the stage. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathryn, for the lovely introductions. Ko le peke whatapu he whangai whatapu ka e tāka te au ki whaete ki I whamalo ki he recognizing a people of the land. Whatapu ki he CEO o e ACFID, SEA, and all the fellow civil society in the room. I was actually thinking of talking like a high-level civil society academic kind of politicians and all sorts of players that civil society has, because we have so many hats that we pull it on and when it's required, when it's needed. And then this morning I was having this conversation with Mark and his team from ACFID. And then I realized this is a bunch of civil society groups going to be in the room. So why am I trying to make it like it, know it better when we are really here as civil society trying to find solutions to the problem that we are facing in the world? And so that has really quickly changed the way I'm going to do my talk this morning. And I think it's about time that we challenge ourselves. Maybe the politicians, with due respect to the former Prime Minister of Tuvalu from the region, maybe our government, they probably had not done enough. But it's about time that we, civil society, start talking about all the things that has not happened and do it ourselves. Yeah? And we had seen things that are happening in our regions that is not really going anywhere, or it's going to the reverse directions. That if we are not putting our effort together to do it, then it's no point of trying to point fingers at others, point fingers at the international communities, point fingers at donors, when we can really do more of these discussions. Yeah? And for Australian civil society not to think of the Pacific as some people lower than them. But we are here in the Pacific, sharing the same oceans. And I think that's really the questions that I would like to put forward in trying to answer the questions, what is beyond aid? Or is there anything beyond aid at all in our region, in our Pacific? When all we think and all we negotiate and all we think we do is really about aid. Yeah, we negotiate, we come talk about climate change. What do we have in mind at the end of it? Is to access the Global Climate Fund. Yeah? What does Australia comes to the Pacific to talk about? $500 million of support. Yeah? And then our government often said, okay, keep your money because we want to push back and make a point. They turn around on the other side and said, no, give us the money on something else. Yeah? And so I think that's really what I would like to share this morning. In terms of what is it that we, civil society, a critical role that we need to play in our development. And I'll trying to see what do we have to talk about when we talk about sustainable development. And it's quite interesting to come across the latest report that the Asia-Pacific, the UN Asia-Pacific had put forward as part of the reporting for the voluntary reporting progress to the UN. And they had put together a report for the Pacific. And of course, it's Asia-Pacific, but what specifically highlighted from the Pacific itself, that there is a negative trend on goal number 2, zero hunger, goal number 9, the industrial and innovations and infrastructure, goal number 14, life below water, and goal number 16, peace, justice, and strong institution. So for those of us who are working in the Pacific in these areas, I think it's about time for us to rethink where is it that we need to strengthen. And there has been a lot of suggestions made from the previous speaker in terms of how do we see ourselves moving forward. But I just want to draw some attention into what Australia is doing in terms of supporting the Pacific in these 4 different areas. Zero hunger is really related to agriculture. And if we really develop further into looking into our trade, the partnership that we claim that Australia is partnering with the Pacific on trade is something that there's a lot of questions around it. Seasonal working scheme seems to be the only youth development kind of work that we see our young people, young men, now women are part of it, on seasonal working schemes. But what does that mean when we draw away the manpower that are really working in our agriculture sector to come and pick fruits in Australia, when they should be at home planting manioke or cassava, taro to feed our family? Because our kind of subsistence agricultural system doesn't really play well to participate in the global trade, but it puts food on the table. Yeah? And then you look into goal number 9, which is more into infrastructure. Australia is going into infrastructure development in the Pacific. We have heard the first speaker this morning from the former Prime Minister about climate change. How does infrastructure development contributing to climate change or making it better? Yeah? When a lot of our infrastructure work is related to promoting a lot more of fuel usage, let alone the whole attention paid to our natural resources. Mining is just one thing that came to mind. Without good standard in place to make sure that our indigenous people are being consulted in the way that it should be, where there are consent, they are done properly, it's not just to tick the box. And I'm just putting forward some of these issues that we continuously struggle when it comes to us looking into development in our country. Life below water is all about the oceans. Yeah? Ocean is a big thing for our Pacific, and our leaders has declared a whole lot of other things. But the question is, why are we still accommodating seabed mining? Yeah? It seems like that we are kind of confusing ourselves in terms of what we declare as important as priority and what is really the real thing in our communities. Peace and justice and strong institution is something that is still a struggle. Yeah? And I think good governance, as our previous speaker talked to about political instability, what does that mean? Yeah? I know my time is coming up, but it's a call for rethinking and for reshaping. PIANGO is really into this. The whole development effectiveness is one of the things that we would like to see a lot more work of our civil society to challenge ourselves to have good practices. Now that we have different players, finance institutions, World Bank, ADB, you name it, they are now players, and they're like donors themselves. Yeah? But can we participate in the safeguard, whatever they call it, that makes it so engaging, but then nobody has taken it up because it's so complicated? Yeah? How do we make sure that those mechanisms of engaging civil society and making sure that good practices are in place? But the beauty of it with this whole development effectiveness is just not calling on the donors, it's calling on us too, to have good civil society accountability mechanisms that we can showcase that we can do this ourselves. But at the same time, it recognizes civil society as development actors in our own right. Yeah? But it does mean that we can be partners without money. But does anyone looking for partners that doesn't have any money? No. They wanted to have partnership, and it's really, I finish off with which is good that I'll have some other time later to share what's from the civil society perspective. But it's a good example of the SID partnership, the genuine partnership that SID has. You look through the 100 and so many partners that they have, none of them is from the civil society. Why? Because we don't have any money to partner with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Siale. Now, for those of you who are on your Twitter, you may well have taken a look at our next guest's Twitter account, where he describes himself as a sun-baked servant of the Most High, trying to be a good husband and father. He's a keen supper, that's a stand-up paddleboarder, for those of you who don't know, and traditional voyager. He's also the General Secretary of the Pacific Conference of Churches. It is Reverend James Bhagwan. He's an ordained minister of the Methodist Church in Fiji. He's a man who knows the media. We've spoken many times as well, but he's also worked extensively in the media himself before he joined the ministry. His areas of advocacy are climate justice, with a particular emphasis on the ocean, gender equality, and also interreligious dialogue. And I welcome him to the stage.
Nisambula Vinaka, grace and peace to you all. I would like to acknowledge the Tokeni Vanua, the Tangata Whanua, the people of the land of this place that we are gathered in, and continue to pay our respects and give our love and share peace with elders, mothers, fathers, and children, past, present, and future. And we pray for grace, peace, truth, joy, life, and well-being, the peace of God upon the land, the people who belong to her, and all who walk lightly upon her. Thank you to ACFID for this wonderful invitation to get someone from the church on the stage. Now that's interesting. So is the Australian government. As I stand here this morning, I'm reminded of a meme on my Facebook page, which says there's a fine line between a good sermon and a hostage situation. So I will pay attention to the time limit this morning. I stand here not as a Pacific leader, but a servant of the Pacific churches, of mothers, fathers, elders, and children of Christian communities, of congregation members representing some 80% of the almost 15 million people of the Pacific, custodians of the majority of the Pacific Ocean, people under threat and exploitation from climate change, geopolitics, and economic globalization. And this morning you have heard much of these stories. You have heard from the Honourable Sopoaga, you have heard from my colleagues, and of course I'm sure you'll hear also from Serena about these things. But I'm here because a deep spirituality permeates the communities of the Pacific and is at the heart of the Pacific people's relationship with each other and the environment. Spirituality is an integral part to the way we interpret, understand, and interact with one another and with the natural world. This spirituality is enhanced by the faith, many faith traditions, of the world which have grown their roots in our diverse Pacific communities. These faith traditions are shared with 85% of those whom we share the planet with. The language of spirituality, the expression in metaphor, in image, silence, hymns of praise and cries for justice, in reflection and meditation, in ethical action, in confession, in repentance and in justice and compassion, is sometimes misunderstood or only understood at a surface level by those not from the Pacific. In a response given during our civil society dialogue with the Pacific leaders just a few months ago, our then Prime Minister of Tuvalu reminded one speaker that he was trying to give a Sunday school lesson to the Pacific. I won't mention who it was. This spirituality is not only experienced through faith communities, but also through indigenous cultures. That deep sense of the Vanua, the Whenua, the Enua, or rootedness not only to land, but rooted in this respect and celebration of just relationships with all creation. The work of the Pacific Conference of Churches in the last 2 decades has contributed to alternatives to economic globalization and neocolonization, rethinking development in the Pacific region through the concepts of rethinking Oceania and the reweaving of the ecumenical and ecological mat, and the renewal of the household of God in the Pacific. Oikos, a Greek word that means household. So for the Pacific, oikos, it is defined by ecumenical unity, witness and solidarity on justice, peace, and grounded in the visions and values of God's kingdom. The image of the household of God in the Pacific was shared by the late president of the Ecclesia Calisiano Tuvalu, the late Reverend Kalahati Kele, at the opening of this year's Pacific Island Forum Leaders meeting in Tuvalu. And while speaking to the context of both Tuvalu and climate change and Pacific regionalism and the leaders meeting, the late Reverend Kele reflected on the household, saying that in our Pacific culture, the house or home or fale is an integral part of our culture as it builds the very foundation, security, and resilience for our children, families, and island communities. For us, house or household is not simply a dwelling place or a shelter. It goes well beyond such perception. A house is where relationships are created based on love and justice, where wisdom from the house flows. This is the particular aspect of our Pacific life that cannot be found elsewhere, only in what we call home. Reflecting on the Christian parable of the wise and foolish builder, or builders, Reverend Kele said that to build a house on the rock was a call to build strong spiritual foundation that is based on love and justice. Referring to the wind and rain and the waves in the parable as cyclones and rains that not only tear down our communal way of living and force us to accept the logics offered by neo-capitalism, and that relationship is only possible in the market space. The late Reverend Kele observed that these were the new rains and cyclones that deteriorate and shook the very foundation of our faith in God and drew boundaries with our neighbors. He challenged the leaders that the future of the Pacific must not be measured in commercial terms, but determined by the smile and happiness of our children. He added, Jesus Christ is the foundation of our faith and was convicted and killed because of the economic and political ideologies of his time. Hence, he took the cross, pain, and agony into his own hands because of his love and compassion for the whole world. The late Reverend Kele used that concept that speaks to all of us, the household. Whether from an economic perspective, an ecological perspective, or an ecumenical perspective, the household is key. The words economy, oikos nomos, meaning the proper management of the household, ecology, oikos logos, meaning the studied knowledge of our planetary household, and ecumenicity, oikumenikos, meaning openness to the worldwide household, all share this basic orientation to the Greek word oikos and the word home. Yet the sad realities is that economics no longer deals with the whole household, with economic subsystems' impact on society as a whole, its sociological, ecological, cultural context. The current focus on economic development alone has led to the dangerous assumption that the household is only made up of one room and everybody else doesn't count. We all have our indigenous sayings, but we know the famous Native American saying, which is beginning to come to sound more and more like our future reality if hunger for economic gain overshadows concerns of the rest of the household. Only when the last tree has died, the last river has been poisoned, and the last fish has been caught will we realize we cannot eat money. The Western model of development, based on an ideology of domination and extraction, has severed the sacred thread that connected economics, ecology, and morality with devastating consequences. We have forgotten that an ecosystem is a system whose elements interact with their surroundings. The ecological, social, intellectual, spiritual context as a unit, the whole household. And there are also very dominating narratives that exist, that anyone who wants to get to this level of advancement in development must do not only what we think they should do, but this is the only way that it should be done. And so I'm very grateful to this ACFID conference has given time to listen to other development narratives and perspectives. And being good and not thumping the pulpit or dragging you into a hostage situation of a sermon, I will just mention two very key things that Pacific churches are involved in. That is around retelling the story or changing the narratives. One is an old attempt, almost 20 years old, and one is new. The first was when the World Council of Churches and the Pacific churches gathered with a project called the Island of Hope as a response to economic globalization. And I invite you to Google it so that I don't have to read it out to you. But the Island of Hope is sustainable, wholesome, peaceful, and all-embracing. The concept of the Island of Hope is not a dream. It is founded in reality and has been the normal way of life in our Pacific Islands. Another attempt to change the story more recently has been the Reweaving the Ecological Map project. Over the last 2 years, the Institute of Mission and Research for the Pacific Theological College and the Pacific Conference of Churches has been working on this project, which focuses on redefining development narrative thinking, rethinking sustainable development, and proposing an ecological development framework. The REM project affirms indigenous and Christian and religious ecological frameworks, knowledge, ethics, and practices, and I believe can contribute much to addressing the ecological crisis today. There is much to talk about. We will have the session right after this, and of course this afternoon for our Talanoas. So I encourage you to continue to listen to our Pacific voices today and in the days to come, and the weeks and years that follow this conference. God bless you all.
Vinaka, Reverend James Bhagwan. Now we have Serena Sasingian. She is the CEO of the Digicel Foundation in Papua New Guinea. Digicel, for those of you who aren't familiar, is everywhere across the Pacific. It's the way you get your phone and internet. And the foundation is the philanthropic arm of that, where they've been building classrooms, mobile health clinics in some really remote parts of the country. Now, Serena actually is a lawyer, but she seems to prefer not spending her time in a courtroom. She has over 10 years experience in the field of development and public policy. She has worked in government and also the private and the not-for-profit sector. She was at the Oil Search Foundation as well, as she's also worked for the Department of Justice and Attorney General. Before all of this, though, Serena worked as the Executive Director of the group The Voice, which she co-founded. It is a homegrown PNG NGO. It's all about empowering young people to be able to contribute to their own communities and to development to help them solve their own problems. She was motivated to set it up by her own experiences, and I'm sure we'll hear much more about it. I welcome Serena to the stage.
Okay, Kathryn, that was a long introduction. But put simply, my name is Serena Sasingian, and as already mentioned, I am the CEO for Digicel Foundation, a large philanthropic organization in PNG. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for the presentation, and I hope I can share a few thoughts that adds to the rich presentations that have already been given. So I started my journey as someone interested in creating change. In 2007, my course mates and I started a youth leadership organization called The Voice. Little did we know in that same year, my current employer, Digicel PNG Limited, would launch its Voice Network by investing over $1 billion into the country and connecting it through a tower network, thereby transforming the way we communicate and the way we engage with each other. From 2007 to 2019, a lot has happened in Papua New Guinea, in the region, and in the world. Globally, we had the 2009 financial crisis, disruption brought about through technological advancement. We had Obama, and then we had Trump. More understanding and action on the growing threat of climate change. We've heard about the rise of inequality and identity politics as more voices demand their right to be heard. Closer to home in PNG, a lot has also happened. We had a $19 billion PNG LNG project that was implemented. We've increased tax revenue to the government, employment, infrastructure projects, sadly, mainly in Port Moresby, which has transformed the life of city dwellers. We've also seen changes in the political landscape from Sir Michael Somare to Peter O'Neill, who held the reins for 8 years, and just recently our new Prime Minister, James Marape. Greater connectivity through mobile phone telephone networks has also enabled the growth of our SME sector, and it would be remiss of me to also not mention an increasing presence of China on our doorstep. So it's against that backdrop that I want to speak to the theme of the conference, Beyond Aid, Championing Sustainable Development Cooperation. So I'm going to frame my discussion around some of the key public policy issues that I feel present both challenges and opportunities towards building a more sustainable and prosperous future for the region, because a stable PNG is good for everyone. So the first issue I would like to put forward is that of our growing population. I'm really going to just speak from Papua New Guinea because that is essentially my experience. For those that don't know, the population of PNG, according to our 2011 census, is just under 8 million people, with 58% being under the age of 25. This is one of the highest in the Pacific. It's known as the youth bulge. PNG has a population growth rate of 3.1%, which means by 2032, we're looking at a population of 13 million people. These are 13 million people that would need access to health services, education, and some form of economic activity to ensure they are productive citizens. Our youth are our future, but are we giving them a chance to succeed and exploit the opportunities that present themselves in a more globalized, digitally connected world? A quick glance at our ranking on the Human Development Index, which in 2018 was 153 out of 189 countries, tell us we are faring way behind in offering young people the opportunity to have a head start in life. Out of the 30,000 students that finish grade 12 each year, there are only 6,000 tertiary spaces available. What becomes of the 24,000 that are faced without opportunity to continue their education? An education system that, since the time of independence really hasn't changed that much. We're not teaching our young people to just go out. We're teaching our young people to look for jobs. We're not teaching them to look for opportunities. Evidence supports that better education yields higher individual income and contributes towards the construction of social capital and long-term economic growth. Literacy is a key skill and a key measure of a population's education. Adult literacy and child literacy remain very low across the country. The 2015 Pacific Islands Literacy Numeracy Assessment provided data on literacy and numeracy skills of students who have completed 4 and 6 years of formal primary education. What it showed in PNG was that out of the 12,380 students that participated in the literacy tests, 2 in every 10 students met or exceeded the expected literacy level, 2 out of 10. In numeracy, out of the 10,500 students that participated, about 5 in every 10 students met or exceeded the expected numeracy levels. Such low levels of attainment in literacy and numeracy is not the fault of the students. Since the government's introduction of tuition fee-free education policy, we've seen an increase in the number of students now attending school, but no further investment has been made to increase the number of teachers or classroom infrastructure to cater for the overload. A case on point is a school in the nation's capital, which is less than a kilometer away from the Parliament House. The elementary school has 2,000 students in grades 1, 2, and 3, with only 15 teachers to take each student. Classes go as high as 80 students per teacher. Teachers are overwhelmed. I was with them a few weeks ago and I asked, how do you teach? And they said, oh, I just lecture. Looking back at the kids is truly frightening. There can be no sustainable development if educational outcomes are going backwards. If these problems were brought about by bad government policy, then it tells us that with real concerted efforts, we can turn the tide around. And I want to share briefly what Digicel Foundation is doing in the area of education. We had examined the complexity of the problem, and we had decided that the biggest value add that we could bring was improving learning, primarily through our school infrastructure program. School boards can apply directly to our foundation for fully kitted classrooms with toilets, staff offices, solar power, and furniture. Over the last 10 years, we are a small foundation. We've built 608 classrooms across all the 89 districts of PNG at a cost of $30 million. What difference does an upgraded classroom make? A lot, actually. We found that for remote and rural schools, upgraded classrooms has increased enrollments and is a source of pride for the community. It is an incentive for the teachers to remain in school and to teach. We've also had a strong focus on our early learning program. Through our program, we identify community volunteers who operate informal early childhood schools in settlement communities, in urban centers, and in selected rural areas. We work with them over a 3-year period to improve the quality of their teaching through an incentives and rewards scheme. Once schools are selected, head teachers are required to attend our 6-week training on the fundamentals in early childhood development and phonics at their own cost. We provide no per diems, no accommodation, and all the trappings that those in the aid sector have become so familiar with. We then do 6 monthly assessments to assess not only the quality of learning happening in the classrooms, but also the level of community participation through regular board meetings. Every 6 months, each school is given rewards. So starting with open air classrooms, school classroom kits, toilets, showers, facilities, and at their final 3rd year of the program as they exit out, we give them money to start a micro enterprise. This program costs less than $100,000 to run every year, and we support 10 schools per year. Over the last 8 years, we have supported 63 early learning centers impacting the lives of 12,000 children. We have found that this is a sustainable model because it requires leadership, community ownership, and good governance. The second challenge that I want to put forward is that of violence and conflict. We all know that PNG has some of the highest rates of gender-based violence. In the highlands of Papua New Guinea, tribal fights sparked by disputes over land, resources, and other grievances lead to dozens of deaths and thousands of displaced every year. Just to add more complexity to the issue, we now have the growing problem of sorcery-related violence, where people are being tortured and killed on accounts of them being witches and practicing black magic. In my time working for the government, nothing has horrified me more than seeing the shocking number of stories that have come through partners working on the ground to combat the problem. With growing public condemnation nationally and internationally, the government did what it is very good at doing, reforming the law. But this was not followed by any budgetary allocation or real concerted effort to address the issues on the ground. At our foundation, we are working to address the problem by looking at the role of men. We recognize men as advocates in the community and leaders in their households, protectors, and guardians. These men are teachers, sporting mentors, entrepreneurs. We have an awards ceremony every year, and our aim is to build this network of honorable men supporting change and fighting against violence in their communities. I want to end off by just touching on the importance of good governance. In 2018, PNG was ranked 138 out of 175 countries on the Corruption Perception Index. Governance is defined as the way rules, norms, actions are structured, sustained, and regulated and held accountable. As in other parts of Melanesia, the birth of the new nation our nation, occurred in the absence of any shared sense of identity among our citizens. Therefore, binding so many communities into an effective political ideological unit remains a formidable challenge. It is no surprise that normally kin-based systems, or what we call the wantok, are more stronger than the formal institutions. Why? Well, because they work. You know, if I have an issue, and I have a family member that is, just had a stroke and completely disabled, it's not like I can go to the government to get tax relief or go to social services to ask for help. I go to my family, and that means chipping in when my family also needs help. So how do you build national identity? In 2007, when I was in university, my course mates and I asked this very question, and our answer was found in the Constitution, and in the one thing that holds and binds our many tribes together, and that's our faith in God and our Christian heritage, which is woven into the identity of almost every Pacific Islander. Our Constitution guarantees us protection of the law, equality, freedom, basic rights, etc., etc. Unfortunately, the rule of law is so weak that many of these rights become words on paper that are rarely enforced. My friends and I had very simple logic that if we created a space for university students to unite beyond their tribal identity and focus on solving problems together, through volunteerism and fundraising, we could build alternative social capital that was centered on a unified agreement on what it means to be Papua New Guinean. Our small association has grown into a student movement. We have a network of over 600 graduates, many of whom are in strategic positions in government, the private sector, civil society. We were very clear that we do not need program funding. So when we were approached by the Australian government aid program in 2016 on how they could support The Voice, we said we'd like technical support to help guide our strategy and look at our governance structure to see how we can make it stronger. They've helped fund action research to understand how we are creating change in our context. And to me, that is a great way that the aid program has worked successfully in my country. In concluding, I would like to end by saying that the only way to champion real sustainable development is to have strong, locally led, local nonprofits that comply with the highest standards of governance. Other than that, I have seen too many organizations become implementers of international INGOs. How can these organizations truly become sustainable if they have no ability to set their own agenda? The private sector and local philanthropy plays a big role in supporting locally led initiatives because they have real vested interest in ensuring there is a stable operating environment. I hope my talk has highlighted some examples of challenges, but more importantly, sustainable solutions towards complex problems. As a Papua New Guinean, I am hopeful about the future because I see the tide turning in favor of good government as people awaken to their individual agency and see PNG for what it is, a land of opportunity for those willing to work hard. So the question that I leave with you all today is, do you view us through that same lens of opportunity? Does it suit your interest to see us less dependent on aid? What if we did get ourselves free, like really free? Where would that leave you? But also, where would that leave us? Thank you.
Thank you. That is on? Yep. Thank you so much, Serena, and to all of you for sharing just a little bit of your thoughts. And now we have the opportunity, obviously, to share with the audience to kind of delve into some of those points that you've raised a little bit deeper and perhaps some others as well. The audience, unfortunately, you won't have the chance in this next 50 minutes to ask questions, but you will later on today as well. So hopefully, between myself and the panellists themselves asking questions of each other, we have the real opportunity to listen to them and their thoughts. And that's really what I want to be able to help us get out of this, is to get a sense of the situation on the ground. And I think, Serena, you just painted a really great picture, I guess, of the situation and the work that Digicel Foundation is doing in PNG and those key areas. Obviously, she mentioned the youth bulge and the projections for what PNG's population is going to be in coming years. That has major implications for Australia, both the government, obviously, and also those working in the aid sector. And you talked about some of the work that you're doing. In light of this conversation about sustainable development, I guess I wanted to put to some of the other panellists first, before we got to what that might look like, giving us a little bit more of a sense of what the situation is on the ground. Are there any of those key points, particularly, Siale, for you? I know you've talked a little bit there about the SDGs and where we stand at the moment and in the Pacific and not necessarily doing so well with them. I just wanted to kind of paint a bit more of a picture for the audience, for them to get an understanding of what is going on in the Pacific at the moment. So what I will do is pass down this mic to you. Hopefully that is on.
Thank you.
That should be on. Yep, that's on.
Thank you, Kathryn, for trying to dig deeper to some of these challenges that we face. But it's not new challenges. Challenges that's always been there, and I think my point that I was putting out there to all of us here is that the current track of what we are doing need to change. And how do we change that? Yeah, and also sharing from PNG, and it's not just PNG, the whole of the Pacific. Our population is going to be led by young people. PIANGO in our 24 countries, PIANGO is a network of umbrella NGOs, acknowledging the former Prime Minister of Tuvalu, recognizing that Tuvalu Association of NGO, TANGO, provides spaces to engage with them. So PIANGO is a network of umbrella NGOs in the Pacific. 6 to 8 of our civil society umbrella NGOs are now led by people that are below 40. That's scary, yeah? Because our civil society in our region has always been run by retired people who had been, kind of almost there in kind of getting out, yeah? But now it's going to be a whole lot of young people leading our Pacific, and their interests and their passions, we don't know. What is it that got them to come to this sector that has always been running by passions? And we run a lot of things from emotions. We will have to build a lot more of our work into evidence-based. Right now in the Solomon Islands, there's a whole debate about Taiwan or China or which one of the two. But our civil society is really leading, saying that we need to hold on to the people that has been in there in our Pacific. But we don't have the evidence to say, okay, this is what Taiwan has been doing, this is what China is offering. Okay? And I think earlier we had heard how our work in civil society in our Pacific has been very disappointing because we expect Australia to be our neighbor that has been based on relationship. And we expect Australia to be much more in terms, doesn't work that way anymore. So how do we deal with the way that we do work that has based on relationship and we expect loyalty? The churches has a really strong positions. Development effectiveness, PIANGO has been part of this journey to Busan, now to Korea. What has come out that we had conversation in the Pacific, we had two things that was dropped out totally when it got to the global level. One is culture, the other one is our spirituality. But PIANGO decided we picked on it. We continue to make that our Pacific specific because it's not going to go away. And then when we have our donors and people from the global to come to our Pacific, our hospitality is like #1. But then how do you challenge them and said, you can enjoy our beaches but this is our issue. And you have hard conversation. It's hard because it's not within us to have those kind of hard conversation. And I think this is really where we need to start engaging. And I'm really looking at Mark here for ACFID, to really come to PIANGO and do the Pacific. April next year is going to be our council, and I'm expecting a whole lot of you to come to the Pacific and have a good conversation, not just about how donor money or how development is all about, but about us, civil society, international NGOs and local NGOs. Humanitarian localization is something that we call for.
And so just to pick what you're saying there, and for people listening to go, okay, well, we can come to the table, we're happy to do that, we want to be showing that we're listening. What does it look like in practice? Reverend, you mentioned this kind of idea too, that Western development, the Western idea of development has not really worked and we need a different perspective. You mentioned two ways that the churches have been trying to do that. Are they perhaps ways that we can look at for inspiration?
Absolutely. One of the challenges for us, and that's why I ended by saying this conversation doesn't just need to be about this session and the sessions afterwards, but the real conversation, how does that sustain and continue? Because it's all well and good to come and say, we're listening to you here. How do you then listen to us in the work that you do when you go back? And that's one of the things that's important. And listening is not about listening to our cries and our problems, but also listening to the innovative ways in which we are doing things. And this is, again, something that we're talking about in the region is Indigenous knowledge. And perhaps that is a lesson for Australia to listen to its Indigenous knowledge here. Indigenous science, Indigenous technology. We come from a region that we're traveling thousands of miles of open ocean well before the fleets were coming out of Europe. You know, we have the technology, we have the understanding of having a harmonious relationship with the environment. There are different ways of development, there are different models, and we can offer those. And I think the key to that is our relationship with not just two things. One of is what Siale was talking about, is about our understanding of relationship and neighbor and family. The other is, of course, the deep relationship that we have with the land. And of course, that's not a good relationship to talk about in the era of extractive development, right? It's not good business to talk about people's relationship to the land. That's why I said we've seen that thread being cut. But that's the important issue, because for us, it's not only about human development, it's not only about human rights, but our concern goes further in the care for the land. What is the impact of extractive industries on the land and in the ocean? What does that mean for us? The big conversations now that are going around blue economy, and we are very concerned about that because it's monetizing something that is a part of us. So those conversations we need to continue. And I think that's, I can only echo what Siale says, come and talk, and then let's talk about how we work together, not just coming us to tell us this is the way we should be doing things. And I want to acknowledge here that in our work as churches, a lot of our church partners from Australia have been making that effort over the last decade to come and say, we want to hear from you how to do things. We want to have a conversation and negotiate that space. So I want to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Ambassador, I'll ask you, because given your role working more with governments as well, you come to this from a different perspective, and you, though, in your speech talked about the need for us to have partnerships, for us to all be working together better, the CSOs, universities you mentioned, and of course governments and others. So is that happening, do you think? And what more can your group, the Melanesian Spearhead group, as you've explained, is the representative body for PNG, Fiji, Vanuatu and Solomon Islands? Are you unified enough to be able to help push this for your member countries?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. It's the platform or the space within which we can always come together. And I entirely agree with what Siale and my good friend Reverend Bhagwan just said. There needs to be connections. The connections cannot just happen by assuming that we do exist. It's in the same manner as in the policy space. You always assume that policy will have to reach out to you. The governments of the day are also expecting civil societies and NGOs to reach out to government. I know there's always a barrier in between. But in the Pacific, or even in the Melanesian Spearhead group, we have devised systems that can enable us, to be reaching out, advocating for one another, particularly in spaces where people really matters. I'm talking about our culture in Melanesia. Recently, last year we had the 6th Melanesian Festival of Arts and Culture that was hosted by the the government of Solomon Islands. It attracted more than 6,000 Melanesians, not only from the Melanesian region, from other regions, including Torres Strait, the Aborigines of Taiwan, the Melanesians in Papua. They all attended this meeting because this is a way of connecting our people on the ground. Because at the end of the day, we are dealing with people. And if the civil societies or if the government of the day are not reaching out, it will remain a silo thinking, put it that way. And my experience in the Pacific, in Fiji, and in Melanesia, there's always a divide that exists in the region. And I think our civil society friends need to work more, including in this meeting. And I agree with Siale. The meeting in the Pacific will need people like you to come and advocate and enlighten, bring some important messages that will enable our governments, our civil societies, our NGOs, our churches, our landowners to work together and understand the very, very important fabric of society, and which is sustainable development of our people. We're also introducing what we call, under our culture program, Melanesian beauty pageants. We also are introducing Melanesian music festivals. This is something that will bring our people together to understand, the importance of not only focusing on development going forward, understand who you are and what do you do and what can you contribute in making your society, livable and enjoyable and sustainable, for the long term. So I firmly believe that whilst there's still that wedge that exists, there's more work that needs to be done.
And bringing Serena in, because I think in your position, Serena, working for the Digicel Foundation, you are experimenting, I guess, this new formation of partnerships that you traditionally weren't necessarily involved, the private sphere as well. Has that been successful? Are there barriers that you've faced perhaps with other traditional CSOs or governments? And are there lessons that you can share?
Kathryn, I think the main issue here is that
We'll just have you bring that up a little bit higher maybe as well.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, no? Yes, okay. The challenges that we face in the Pacific are complex and they're multi-pronged. We have, what angle do you actually tackle things on? I stayed deliberately away from talking about climate change because I knew that it would already be something that would be discussed by the other panel members. And I brought forward this issue of education because right now, we have a government that is very, very pro, like PNG. We have a whole catchphrase now, take back PNG. My point is that we won't really be able to take back our country if people can't read and write. Our jobs will be taken. We're already seeing that through Filipino labor coming in, cheaper Indian labor coming in to take out very, very low-level positions. What does that also mean for the not-for-profit sector? You know very well in your country, the way that you have been able to grow, the way you have been able to develop is through private sector investment, but also growing philanthropy. People should have the ability to choose to give. And I guess we have to look at aid not as something that will just be coming into the country nonstop. It has to be looked at in phases. And I think recognition of the fact that there is a youth population and a youth boom across the Pacific, particularly inside countries like ours in Papua New Guinea, already the tide of expectations are changing. They're exposed to social media now. They're asking, everyone has that, why don't I have that for myself? And with that creates more expectation on government to actually provide. And I'm sorry, but I'm just gonna say that I'm quite fed up of going to conference after conference, sitting inside workshop after workshop, where we have said we're going to build capacity, build capacity. What is building capacity when you have training workshops where the government has no real funding to actually operationalize what it's meant to do? There's no programs, there's no funding for programs. And if it has no funding for programs, that means that the aid program will dictate what the agenda is. So I've sat in meetings, I've sat where agenda setting has taken place, and I'm sorry, but it's skewed to one side. So that is why I honestly, am truly fed up. And I'm like, unless we actually determine our own agenda of how we're going to grow our economy, how we're going to grow jobs, where we're going to look, because you also have to remember now, for instance, in Papua New Guinea, you would see the influx of people coming into Australia. I'm sorry, you can travel to Manila now for 1,500 kina. That's like $600. Why would I come here when my kina really means nothing in Australia? I go across now to Manila to buy everything that I need because it's cheaper. People are going there now for healthcare. So what will that mean about people-to-people links here? People are choosing to send their kids across to the Philippines. They're choosing to send their kids to China. I remember sitting with a governor from my province back at home, and he told me this clearly. He says, Serena, he was like, and I'm from ACFID Province, so if you know where that is, it's on the northern end of Papua New Guinea. He was like, look at the map, and he was like, you need to now practice looking up. And I was like, what? And he was like, I'm pretty sure that your reference has always been south. He was like, look up. He was like, see where you are located. My province, Isipik. He was like, across is the border, Wesipik. That's your highway into Indonesia. He was like, look at where we could be exporting. Look at where we could be doing trade. Because now this is the next decade of trade, not aid. And that is my point fundamentally. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting with the same NGOs in the room. They lack capacity. They're not able to hand over. They don't do governance. They don't do annual reports, et cetera, et cetera. You are ACFID. You are all about code of conduct, all about guidelines. That's what our NGOs need. That's what civil society needs. That's what government needs, good governance. So that's my point.
I won't ask a question other than to say, does anyone want to respond to that, to Serena's comments?
I think that I agree to some extent, but not fully. Yeah? Because if you don't use your aid money to invest in civil society, to do their institutional support, New Zealand, Australia, as soon as your government changed, you moved. No core funding to civil society. And how do you expect civil society to have a good, sound, organizational governance? Because a lot of the funding now go to, social networking. Yeah? That we had moved away from the fundamental of supporting institutions. And this institution is very crucial to hold government accountable. Unless you put money into some of our civil society in the region, and I am sure Australia as well, there is no way. It's like we are going around and round and round. They expect us to do more. How can we do more when we don't even have any money to pay for the staff, to pay for, basic thing, utilities? Yeah? When we know that holding accountable, government accountable is a risky business, because they can turn around and say, shut them down, because they don't have system in place. Yeah? If you are really serious about this whole partnership that civil society need to have a say, invest in civil society so we can do much more. Yeah? Our young people, we need coaching. Yeah? Because they come in, they have a whole lot of new expectation of civil society work. They want to run and hold everybody to account. And then when they are being told off, what do? We have a whole lot of our young people who are coming just from university, back home, that the conservative gatekeepers are sitting there and say, your piece of paper doesn't count for anything. And the sad thing is, they have been studying in Australia and New Zealand, or America, or wherever. They have a gateway to fly. What happened to our young people who don't even have that opportunity? Yeah? So there's a whole lot of work that we need to invest in civil society if we are expecting them to hold and make change in this whole dynamics of different players. We talk about innovative in science. We talk about seabed mining, for example, and you will hear the whole lot of me talking about seabed mining. Because it's really, really a concern. We can't talk about climate change. We can't talk about anything else without ocean in the Pacific, without making sure. How can we talk about tuna when we are also accommodating seabed mining? But the interesting thing about tuna, it's not in our dinner table anymore. Eh? Where is it going? Japan, yeah? So they get more of those healthy food while we eat tin fish or noodles. What does that kind of trade? Is that the kind of thing that we want? So we have to be mindful. The civil society had to hold the card and said, yeah, we want to do trade. We want to invest into science and innovations and all of that. But there are key red flags that is non-negotiable. Yeah, and that's our oceans. That's our natural resources. So there are things that we cannot do without civil society, but we cannot hold civil society to say that they're not doing anything, they don't have good governance. How can they be when you don't even invest in them? Thank you.
I entirely agree that there is a space for civil society in this development paradigm shift. There is a big space for civil society to move in. Even in climate change negotiations, there's always a difficulty. The rules of procedures does not allow civil society to be part of the main negotiation process. That is the governance at the global level. And that space really needs to be fully understood. I know for those of us been involved in negotiations in climate change, like the former Prime Minister Sopuang, we know exactly how that game is played. But again, the issue that Serena mentioned on governance, I really want to, on good governance, I really wanted to pick that one up. In the development paradigm in Melanesia right now, we are focusing on a holistic, sustainable development approach where good governance is recognized as an important pillar to go forward, and recognizing the roles of all stakeholders who contribute to the development of Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Fiji, Vanuatu. This is really critical for us because we know that, as I said in my presentation, political stability is a founding pillar for our organization. And it's really important that we continue to harness to see where good governance principles will be strengthened in our policy discourses in Melanesia. Thank you.
Thank you. That's right. Did you want to say anything extra on that? Or we can, we don't have a lot of time. In fact, I'm just told that we have 10 minutes. So I'm not quite sure how we'll get through everything in 10 minutes. Reverend, was there something quickly?
Yeah, very quickly. The issue of good governance applies also, of course, to the churches. I've talked about the spiritual aspect. I've talked about the role that churches can play as key influences in Pacific Island countries. But I have to acknowledge the role that they have negatively played as gatekeepers sometimes. And that as we make those changes by focusing on governance, I think it has to be across the board. That's one. The second thing is that I think it's important for us when we look in the context of, for example, the SDGs, instead of saying to Pacific communities and Pacific organizations, oh, you need to step up and focus on these goals. And then we ask the question, what happened to the last set of goals, and what happened when they threw that out and came up with a new one. But for us, the point here is that I'd like to make is that it's important to try and see that the faith communities, civil society have been doing this work before these goals were developed. And it's about time that those who measure these goals don't just wait for us to come and report, because sometimes we're not included in that conversation, but actually recognize, yes, civil society and churches, etc., have been involved in healthcare, have been involved in these issues since before the UN was even established. Pacific churches have been working on these same issues for us for coming up to 60 years. Of course, things change as we go along. We issued the first statement on climate change in 2004 with the Untitled Declaration. In 2009, the Moana Declaration started the conversation around the possibility of climate-induced displacement. And so we need to be able to recognize that the Pacific communities have been doing this work. It's not about just measuring it from one Western perspective. We need to come and see what's been happening on the ground. Thank you.
very briefly, I guess what I maybe would like to put forward to you is that, as you say, the Pacific has been speaking about issues like climate change for such a long time. As we have a room full of people working within the aid sector, have people been listening enough, and is the aid sector kind of adapting quickly enough for the challenges that the Pacific region particularly is facing? And put that to you. Yeah, all of you.
Okay, I got the mic. The answer is no. It's too slow and it's too little. It's the same with the issue of climate change, adaptation and mitigation. Too little and too slow. You know, and it's not just the case in the Pacific. I just came back from Germany having the same conversation in line with the release of the special report of the IPCC special report on oceans and cryosphere. And those countries that are on the North Sea have to build seawalls, but they can't build them fast enough or high enough. And so it's about, are you serious about what you want to do? And if so, you need to come and talk and listen, be ready to listen, and listen to our solutions as well.
So I think to just that point, I want to share, like, I think about 2 years ago, I had gone with Dame Meg Taylor, Secretary General for PIFS, up to Hagen. And we visited a technical institute. And she stood in the front, and there was an auditorium full of students. And she said, okay, I want to ask how many of you here in this room actually identify as a Pacific Islander? And she said, not a Pacific Highlander. She's like, a Pacific Islander. And, you know, a few hands started to go up in the room. And I think for me, like, positioning that statement first, like front and center, just in the dialogue of climate change, what I have appreciated is that through the movement, more and more so, we have heard the voices of Indigenous people. And with everything that I've said about, you know, private sector-led growth, I'm very, very cognizant of the fact that in my country, that is heavily, heavily reliant on extractives. We have really seen the pillage of our land, of our ecosystems. We have seen really just, you know, the breakdown of so much of what has held society and community together for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. To that point, though, who do I point the finger of blame to? Because I'm tired of looking at all the extractives saying it's your fault. I'm going to start holding my government accountable, because actually you are mandated to protect our rights. It is your responsibility to enforce regulation. It is your responsibility to look at the environmental impacts and what it's going to have on your people. And I just think that we've been going around in circles. So for us back at home, like obviously, because when you talk about the impacts of climate change, when you talk about land displacement and stuff, it's something that we feel. And I mean, I don't, you know, I could go into a whole spiel as well talking about West Papua, but like, where do you start? That whole landmass is being extracted. And I've sort of just gone, look, where am I going to focus my time and attention? And what I have seen that has been most fruitful, most is actually working with Papua New Guineans to start enforcing their rights, because we come from a free country. Our gift is our constitution. Our gift is our freedom. But freedom comes at a cost. You actually need to work to be free. And I think for us, more and more so, like, we are being drawn as well into the whole climate change discussion. Obviously, like, we're a larger island than the rest of the small island states, so we don't feel it, you know, as directly. Obviously, some of our other islands are being impacted greatly. But the thing is that, you know, agriculture, with the changing in weather patterns and seasons, we are going to be impacted. We are going to be affected. And I guess the final point that I just want to, you know, raise is that, you know, aid, like I said, aid comes in phases. I guess it's recognizing the phase of time that my country is at when it comes to how we sit down together, how we dialogue, recognize that there are strong local organizations that are already forming and starting. See how you are working with them, not working over them or working to give them, create more dependency, because we need to stop this whole dependency thing. And I say that I just want to really, just with Siale's point, I wasn't saying that I don't believe in supporting civil society. Actually, civil society has been what has been that voice out there in the wilderness, you know, holding government accountable. What I'm talking about is now moving to that next phase of government actually listening and responding to people, not being reactionary to politics, but really engaging in policy where government and people work together for a better, freer society. So, I mean, I think those are just my thoughts on climate change.
partnership, coalition work, inclusive, disability, young people, women need to be in these conversations about aid. Most of our countries, they have donor roundtable. Yeah, we are not there. Either we are outside in the corridor or we are somewhere else. Yeah? If we are serious about this work, we have to be in the room. All of our civil society, not just like one group that government likes. Yeah? How do we build coalition when we sometimes have to be pushed to work with people that we don't like? Yeah? That have different priorities. Civil society in particular as well. Challenge ourselves, how can we face to face with private sector and corporate businesses, which we already know that sometimes they come with a different agenda. But if we are in this together, how do we draw the line? And this is where the code, development effectiveness, this is the whole conversation around having good practices in place that can guide us so that our interest, individual interest doesn't run away with the whole conversations. Yeah? And government have to recognize civil society as development actors in our own right, not when they want to hear us, and then when we say something that doesn't fit in with them, then they try to say, okay, where is your auditing statement, where is your annual report, where is your everything, just like to draw the line in terms of trying to shut us down. Yeah? But the thing is, if you remove civil society from our society and our whole work of development, where would we be? Yeah? So I think this is where we need to have everybody recognize that our society, we need everybody. And this dynamics of sustainable development that comes in really big elephant in the room that we don't even know where to start. And we are blind and we thought that the tail is the ear or whatever. Yeah? How do we work together to make sure that our individual contributions add value? Disability, you know, for Tonga in particular. How do you say that we want to be inclusive when we don't even have inclusive education? And they want to run things, but they don't even have the capacity. Yeah, there's a whole lot of things that we need to seriously look into that can contribute to building our Pacific. And I think the opportunity is now that we need to build a coalition, partnership, making sure that when we come to partnership, we understand what we mean. Yeah, thank you.
And Ambassador, I think you can sneak in just a few extra minutes.
Yes. Thank you. In terms of financial flows, one of the challenges that we face is that the repackaging of development funds into climate funds. We always fight at the global level, at the multilateral, at the UNFCCC, that we need new additional financing for climate to meet our mitigation goals, adaptation goals, and even resilience goals. And that is one of the challenges. And I feel that something that, you know, civil society can bring up, because we at the policy space, we've been discussing that. Why should we repackage development funds when development funds have a role already earmarked to? But the trend that is now prevalent now is that they've been repackaged and called climate financing funds. This is totally unacceptable, and I hope this is something that you can discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you. That is a clear message from you. And I believe we have one question or comment from someone very important in our audience. That is Mr. Anele Sopoaga, the former Prime Minister of Tuvalu, who we heard from earlier.
Thank you very much. Just very, very briefly, and I want first to acknowledge with thanks the contributions from the panelists. Very, very useful. They reflect the situation in the Pacific Island countries. But just a couple of points. Civil society in Tuvalu, given Tuvalu is a very small island country, includes everybody, including the government. The government is part of civil society, and the dialogue has to be like that, to be inclusive, as you have been saying. But I think one underlying principle that needs to be in dealing with our partners is trust and respect, and accountability for mutual benefits to both sides. We are moving away from the donor-recipient paradigm to partnerships. As my colleague Ambassador Amena was saying too, the connections is very critical. I simply haven't heard what are the ideas to improve the connectivity between the ACFID, for example, who provide assistance. In fact, it is their taxpayers' money. And how are we going to make sure the government here accounts for that very constructive contribution, as well as our governments in the Pacific Island countries? How can we account for that connections? And how can we improve that connectivity, which is very, very crucial to make sure the resources from taxpayers' money, people, goes to the ground to community-owned projects in the Pacific Island countries. I haven't heard that connections coming more clearly. And I think we need to use this conference to really see how we can enhance and improve that connections, as Ambassador Volley has said. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, and I think that's probably a good way to lead into what will be the conversations this afternoon. You will have the chance to have one-on-one discussions with our panellists here, and I'm sure Mr. Sopawanga, yourself as well, and many others, to share your ideas and some of those possible solutions. That's all for me today, though. So thank you very much for sharing this conversation with us. It's been a real privilege, and thank you all for your time to listen.